tired, so tired, overtired.
Hey, you're listening to Overtired. Hi there. I'm Brett Terpstra. I am joined by Christina Warren this week. Jeff is out, but we have a special guest to take his place. Marcin, is it Wichary? Wichary?
It can be, yes. It's technically Wichary, but I've lived in America for like 17 years, and I'm kind of more used to what you said than my actual name.
Yeah, we have. I work with a very international team, and some people have resorted to spelling their names phonetically for American English speakers, and some people have just basically changed their name because that's the way everybody says it. Poor Stefan. Everyone calls him Stefan because it's Stefan.
See, which is how I would say it, but it's Stefan. Yeah. That says so much about.
I do my best. Like,
America.
First thing I ask people is like, how do you say your name? And then I do my best to remember, but a lot of times it throws me.
Yeah.
So Marcin he has a book coming out. It's a Kickstarter right now about keyboards and the history, like 150 years of the evolution and progression of the computer keyboard and typewriter keyboards and early input devices. And it is, from what I've seen, it's fascinating. I've only read excerpts that are up on the Kickstarter page around the shifthappens.site. If anyone wants to check it out, that'll be in the show notes. But yeah, we're excited to talk. We're excited to nerd out about keyboards and all of the work that went into that book today.
Great.
So how you guys, how are you guys? How are you?
I'm good. I'd love to hear from Marcin, because it's been a busy couple of weeks, right? Because the Kickstarter went live last week or week before last.
Yeah, a week and a half ago, and it's funny. It's gone really well. I'm really grateful for people's support because the book is. I like the book. I hope a lot of people like the book, but it's a little bit of a strange book. It's not like a usual book. It's pretty nerdy. It's pretty deep, but it's also very visual. And I think seeing people, back it, and we met our goal in under 2 hours. It was incredibly validating, but it's also a strange set of emotions for sure. The Kickstarter is kind of like, it's going, but it's met its goal, but that doesn't mean that the book is ready. The book is still half a year away. So it's sort of like a strange moment of half celebration, which I think you don't get with maybe traditional publishing, but you sort of inherit this strange sequence of steps. And, it's always interesting because I think every big creative project is tricky because even if it goes really well, it's over in a way. Like it's this sort of, it's almost like a performance. You bring something out there, people maybe like it, maybe don't like it, probably a combination of both. And then there's this strange like hollowness, right? There's this sort of the end of this stage of performance. And so the Kickstarter was very exciting for a while, and then it started quieting down, which, everything would. And now it's a little strange because I don't know how to feel exactly.
Yeah. I think that's true of anything that's as exciting as seeing $500,000 come in. There's going to be a hollowness after that excitement is over. Speaking of feeling hollow, you guys want to do a quick mental health check-in? A mental health corner. Erin has told me she's going to work on our segue music, but I have failed to get her my notes, so that's on me at this point. But just imagine, if you will, some like martini music, 1950s, maybe even Zarvok's voice saying mental health corner. Just picture it. Christina, do you want to kick us off?
Yes, mental health corner. My mental health is pretty good this week. Last week was kind of a mixed bag because I was getting back from vacation, and there was the high vacation, which was awesome. And then I was immediately came back from vacation, and GitHub announced layoffs.
Yep.
And so which is unfortunately, not unique for the tech industry right now. Microsoft had announced some a few weeks earlier. We'd hoped that we would be immune. We were not, and so that's hard. It brings up, as we've talked about on the podcast before, like a lot of past feelings about the industry I used to work in and the uncertainty of things, and and then obviously you feel worse for all the people who are losing their jobs, in addition to the uncertainty about your own position and whatnot. And even though I think we're okay, like there are no guarantees, and like my immediate concern isn't like whether or not I'll have a job, because I think that I'll be okay. Even if I were to lose my job, I have confidence that I would be able to find something, and at least I have savings. But it's still hard. So it was sort of like this, like high of taking my first real vacation in several years, and then immediately hit with like the stress of layoffs and everything that comes along with that. But this week, trying to kind of turn a page, and I've had some really good conversations with people, and I've done some cool things. Having Marcin on Rocket earlier this week was honestly a delight. And those sorts of things, like when I do things that feed me creatively, that helps my mental health a lot, even when there are other uncertain things happening. Like if I can do things that I feel fulfilled creatively, and I felt that this week in a number of ways, that's really good. So I would say like I'm in a good place, but it was definitely like, if we had recorded last week, that would not have been great. Like
Sure.
I would not have been in a good place to record last week.
Which is part of why we didn't record last week.
It's part of why we didn't. I was going to say, I not only do we not record this podcast, but I didn't record the show that I do on YouTube. And I do have some guilt about that, because part of me is like, suck it up. Your job is to literally talk into the camera and to get excited and act. And I can do that. Even if I was in a really bad place, I could do that. The hard thing was I couldn't write the script. I was my ADHD got really out of control. And I was like, if somebody else had a script for me, I could show up and suck it up and do it. Right.
Sure.
Like I have that ability. I know not everybody does. I have that ability, even when things are like awful. I can be, bipolar. It's not bipolar. It's honestly, I don't know if it's a good thing, but I can go from like screaming at someone to then immediately like hi and welcome to, like I could do that turn in 2 seconds if I had to, but I couldn't write the script. I couldn't do it, and I couldn't get it done in time for us to record. And I had to just tell like my team, I was just like, I can't do it. Like if somebody had something pre-written for me, I could have done it, but I just can't go through the motions of like getting myself focused enough to actually write what I needed to write and research what I needed to research. That I was not able to do.
I think, knowing you as an ADHD person, if enough stress had been put on you, if enough pressure had been behind, like you do this or you're fired, or you do this or we kidnap your mom, like you could pull it off.
Oh, totally.
I know you could.
Totally.
But yeah, given the ability to take the out, yeah, I can see for sure why you did that.
And that's what you're exactly right. I think back about when Mashable had layoffs, and that was like one of the worst experiences of my professional life, and will probably remain that, because it was just so hard. And the following week, I had to fly to California to go to an on-background security briefing with Apple, and I booked my flight to the wrong to the wrong San Jose, and which I realized right before I boarded a flight to Costa Rica. Thankfully, I did not get on the plane, and then had to fly.
I was going to say, where's the wrong San Jose? Okay.
Yeah. Well, look, the airport codes are similar. Concur messed up. I'll take the L on some of it, but it's one of my favorite stories, because I did almost go to the wrong Costa Rica, go to the wrong San Jose. But you're right. And in that moment where it did feel very much like everything was at stake, where I was like, if you don't this is a very important thing you go to. We've just laid off 10% of the staff or more than that, 20% of the staff. And the money is not great. And you're going on this trip because they've approved it and you cannot screw up. So when people were like, oh, you should have just gone to Costa Rica. And I was like, no, I transferred like 3 other cities and had to go on a ridiculous process to finally get there, but I did. But yeah, you're right. If it had been like enough stress, I could have done it. But fortunately,
sometimes you don't fuck around and find out.
Exactly. So that's my update.
All right. Well, speaking of feeling creatively fulfilled, I am not, and it is killing me. I'm writing content for work, and it's not like I have found things I'm excited about. Did you know that you can create a VirtualBox image and with the click of a button, deploy it as a compute instance on Oracle Cloud? To me, that's interesting. You can build your own local Oracle Linux box and deploy it as a cloud machine, and it'll generate all the same processors and memory setup and all of the command line utilities that you've installed fastidiously with with Oracle Linux's package manager and everything, and you can just push it to the cloud. And like, that's interesting to me. That I can get excited about, that I have fun playing with. Right now, I'm writing a deep dive on like command line parameters for the like flags for a command line tool, because I just needed content to come out this week, and I haven't had the motivation to do any personal coding projects. And I decided my project was going to be to start watching Breaking Bad alternating with Malcolm in the Middle, just to try to get the Bryan Cranston juxtaposition. But it didn't work out. I ended up going all in on Breaking Bad. So I'm on season 3 because I just don't have the motivation to do anything else with my time right now. It was an interesting experiment, seeing Bryan Cranston as like the what would you call his Malcolm in the Middle character? Befuddled,
yes,
quirky, the comedic dad, versus the Breaking Bad Bryan Cranston was it was a trip. But anyway, I need mania. I mean, we know what happens if I'm stable for too long, and I have been stable. And my brain is starting to think like, what if I accidentally took 2 of my ADHD meds today? Or what if I made myself stay up all night and just kind of push that line of like being okay versus being manic, and just try to trigger a manic episode? And I talk myself out of it every time, because I know what that leads to as well.
Right.
Which is to say, I know that leads to
bad.
Being very tired and unproductive. Like, my mania doesn't get very dangerous. Like, I don't gamble. I don't have crazy sex. I don't hurt anybody. I write code, but it also means not sleeping and being very unhealthy. And anyway, that's me. So we saved Marcin for last. You can choose to partake in the mental health corner if there's anything you want to share, but you can also pass.
I want to share. I don't know how much of this is. The listeners don't know me, so the context might be missing. But I already started a little bit about, how sort of getting this big personal project that was like the book has become so big that it almost became like a partner, like something that was accompanying my life for many years, and it still is, with its own moods and its own sort of conventions, and so like at no point I know whether the book is gonna be kind to me today, or is it gonna be cruel and whatnot. So it's definitely become like this strange big personal project. And in addition to the fact that I, in many numerous ways, tried to do the book my way, kind of like to put something out there that's really just like me in a book form. And that obviously has challenges whenever somebody then pokes at the book when it's out there, or even the website or a Kickstarter, and say, I don't like it, or I don't know about that. Luckily enough, people seem to be liking it. And actually it's been incredibly wonderful and warm for me to see all of my friends from my prior lives and careers and just nooks and crannies of life saying like, oh, finally, I was waiting. I was like, we haven't talked in 10 years, but I'm glad you're here. But there were also moments, honestly, where I was frustrated because I think maybe for the first time in my life, I'm a white guy, so my Twitter life is very easy in general. But I think this was the first time where I got angry at people mansplaining things to me about keyboards, where I was like, hey, I just wrote a book about this. I think I kind of know a lot, so you don't have to tell me things. And it's just, and I kind of started understanding how complicated that is, because some of their feedback was great. And I don't want to say like, don't tell me anything about anything. I want feedback. I'm a designer in my real life, and feedback is currency. Like, I want to be good, but there's some moments which is like, I kind of want to stop you right here because this is just annoying to me. So,
do you know who I am?
Yeah, exactly. So that was really, I'm going to say interesting, mostly all positive. There are people helping me out. There are people checking in with me, which is really great. But there definitely was heightened emotions. And Christina, you mentioned tech industry. I'm also part of tech industry in my real life, but I didn't even have as much time in the last weeks to think about it, because the book took such a big part of my life, and sort of like getting it out there and having a Kickstarter for your project is its own project. It's sort of like this secondary sort of sidecar project, as I'm learning. And the last thing I wanted to mention, I went to my first boxing class in my life, and that was fun. And it turns out I like punching things. So I don't know what it says about me.
That's great.
There was a fun discovery.
Did you also get punched?
No, I was put next to a punching bag as a rookie.
I was just curious, because that seems like the other half of boxing is getting punched. You kind of have to like both.
Yeah, I think that's gonna come next. We'll see how it goes. But the first one was.
You're gonna go
fun.
back. You're gonna keep up.
I'm going back. Yeah.
All right.
Love that.
So now on to the keyboard corner, shall we? We were talking before the show, before Christina got here, about how you are not actually like a mechanical keyboard nerd in the way that kind of the community exists today. People that are very worried about thwack and sizzle and soldering and lubricating their switches, and like that's not necessarily you. So what is your interest in keyboards? Yeah,
I think numerous by this point, and I have a mechanical keyboard. I think I just need to be obsessed about keyboards in general, including their history and the sort of societal aspects and the software and all of that stuff. So I think partly, my role is to be an observer, but I think originally, so I'm a UX designer with a big sort of serving of an engineer on the side. And so I think originally the keyboards were just really interesting because they're the interface between people and computers. And I started being curious, like, who designed them? And it turns out really nobody. My book is actually called Shift Happens. It's kind of a joke, but it really is actually meaningful to me in the sense that keyboards just sort of happen. It was like 150 years of them happening over and over again. And there was nobody in charge. And there's this strange evolution of things. And the fact that if you look at the keyboard from 150 years ago, the first QWERTY keyboard, and you look at the keyboard you have under your fingertips right now, they're both almost the same, which is really strange. It's still QWERTY. You could, grab the person who invented it and sit them in front of your computer today. They would know what to do. But of course, they're also incredibly different. They're attached to very different devices. They serve different purposes. We spend much more time talking with our fingers now than writing. which is not something that happened even 20 years ago. So there was this sort of desire or interest for me in all of the design aspects, like who's using them, what problems they are solving, how they evolve as an object, how the technology that was attached to the keyboards changed the nature of keyboards, etc., etc. Right? So all of this, and I found, and there are some books that talk about typewriters, and there are definitely a lot of contemporary writing about mechanical keyboards because it's a big thing now. But there was nothing that connected all of this, and I just wanted. For a while, I wanted it to exist, and then I decided that I will make that exist, this sort of grand story of how it all happened over the last century and a half.
So you've been researching this for like 6 years, right?
Yeah.
And probably before that as well, but like actually working on the book for 6 years. What is the strangest keyboard you ran into?
Oh my. There are many strange keyboards. It's really actually hard to say because on any given week, I will give you a different answer.
Sure.
But I have this, the recent strange one. I have this watch. It's a Seiko watch from the 1980s, and it has what I think is the smallest keyboard ever made. Each key is like 1 millimeter. It's not even a key, like you're not touching it. It's more like you go left and right, and then you it's what they would call an index typewriter or an index keyboard today. Like how you type in your Apple TV password or your Xbox thing. So but it's comical. It's so tiny. It's like the watch is not even that big because 80s watches weren't, and it's neither a key really nor a board in a way, but it is kind of cute that they tried to do it, and it's really pain to use, but it's kind of fun to have like the smallest keyboard. I've never heard of a smaller one in my life, so that's the most recent strange keyboard that I learned of, and of course it's in.
I love that. And
I had a calculator watch. Sorry, go ahead, Christina.
No. That would also be like a similar thing, a calculator watch. I was just going to ask, like, what's your favorite keyboard, personally?
Yeah,
from any era, teletype, typewriter, computer, whatever.
I think the one that I was maybe, if you count like my amazement as a metric. So for the longest time, I've heard about Selectric as being like the ultimate keyboard, right? Like there's, I think people of a certain age say Model M, and then people a little bit older say Selectric, and it's just like over and over again. And it's really interesting because I'm always suspicious of people like saying like, oh, they peaked with the Selectric and then it all went to hell because, like they don't make them like they used to. Is generally like a scary attitude often, and maybe there's some version of gatekeeping. It's just like the bad nostalgia. So I was just like, whatever, Selectric, fine. And then I rented one for a week from a local typewriter store, which is a funny thing to say, and
amazing.
It was actually really amazing. So first of all, it's a beautiful object, the Selectric. Like it was beautiful in the 1960s, but it's still a beautiful object today. And then as I typed on it, I actually realized it's much more like a computer keyboard, but there's no electronics in it. It's still electromechanical, but it made it feel so smooth, and it has the quote unquote features that you would expect from a computer. Like you can press two keys at the same time, and mechanically through like a very clever system of ball bearings, it would allow you to press two and it would remember the second one. Or if you press enter and the carriage still goes to the beginning, it takes a while, you can press another key and it will not lose it. And there's beginnings of arrow keys there. And of course the fonts you can swap. And my kind of mental model was, it's sort of like the last movie with special effects before CGI, where it's a dead end, but you really appreciate how much effort. And it's an incredibly complex object. Inside, it's I think 5,000 parts. You could, in the 60s, 70s, 80s, you could have a career of fixing Selectrics because they were both incredibly popular, but also incredibly complicated. So you also appreciate this like really complex object in a way that, of course, everything we do today in software is probably more complex, but you don't see it, right? You don't have a sense of how complex things are. And this one you could open up and see like, oh my God, okay, this is not a regular typewriter. This is some next level stuff. And I think to me, it was just kind of amazing, right? That it was maybe like the last impressive typewriter you could relate to, because, you know, the electronic typewriters, the iPhone keyboard, all of the machine learning today, it's just there, right? It's just there in a cloud doing its own thing. And any mechanical keyboard today is actually incredibly simple, right? It's just like the same switch over and over again.
Yep.
So there was something about this like built device, and it really felt wonderful under your fingertips. I was like, okay, I see how people remember this. I see how people try for it. And the funny thing is that the last thing maybe I wanted to mention, and people kind of forget this, people love the Selectric so much. By the way, you can blame Selectric for the caps lock key being in the place it is today, which every programmer hates.
Yeah.
Programmer lost that battle in the early 80s. There was a literal battle. People who use Selectric were just like, no, this has to be like Selectric. So they moved it back. But people loved it so much that IBM like forever tried to recreate that feeling. So first there were beam spring keyboards. There were the 70s kind of really expensive terminal keyboards. And then there was the Model F, which was a cheaper version of a beam spring. And then there was the Model M, which was a cheaper version of the Model F. So it's funny because the Model M, which people today say it's one of the most wonderful keyboards, right? It's the king of click, it's the God's own keyboard. It's like the fourth watered down version of the Selectric, which, just tells you how funny it is, how history works, right? Like,
yeah. So do you think it's a feature or a bug that the complexity is hidden now? Well, the complexity by and large has moved into the realm of software. Like you said, like a mechanical keyboard today is just, it's a bunch of switches on a board. And most people using a computer have no idea how complex the software they're using is. But is that good or is that bad?
I think it's, well, it depends if the software is good itself. I think.
Sure.
Like, if I see a bad web app, I kind of want to fix it.
Sure.
And it's not really possible with the exception of maybe, overriding CSS and stuff like that. If it works well, it might be okay. But I think there is something. I think what we lost, and to some extent, is you can just like peek under the hood of software as easily as maybe you used to. And also, I don't think we ever figure out how to make software exciting for people who don't care. Like in a way, you can sort of, again, open the hood of your car. Well, not today, but 20, 30 years ago, or just like get a packet of Lego and kind of like appreciate the bits and pieces and the whole result. I think view source was the last maybe example of that, and there are modern versions of view source, of course. There's but software is like can be so beautiful, and not even like well written software. Like software bugs can be beautiful and fascinating, but I'm still waiting for maybe waiting for more like storytellers in that space, because I think there's so much more we could do to just get people excited and understanding. Maybe I just really remember one of the foundational works of art for me was The Soul of the New Machine, the book from I think early 80s, and it was because
such a great book.
Yeah, it was the book about. Ostensibly, it's the same way, like my favorite movie, Sneakers, is ostensibly about technology, but it's just really about people and emotions. And The Soul of the New Machine, the book was about, like, how is it to create a computer and how it is to sort of negotiate with all its feelings of having this sort of creative pursuit, but in this really strange space. And I think I'm just hoping we see more of those kind of stories told, because I think we lost some of that sort of wonder of software.
Yeah. No, I think you're right. I think you're exactly right. It was funny right before, the reason I was late to record this podcast, not that the audience cares, but I'll share anyway, is I was recording another podcast, and I was talking about, it's called The Last Detail, and I was talking about mini disc players. and was because it's a podcast where you like focus on like hyper focus on like one particular object, and I kind of didn't really follow the script because we were talking less about the specific object, which was interesting and I loved, but more about like mini discs themselves. And a lot of that was kind of the personality and kind of the weirdness and the like the care that went into that, which we don't have today, right? Like the consideration, and because and I almost wonder if that's part of the reason why there has been such a resurgence in the keyboard community, is that we've all just kind of become bored with the status quo, and there is something about being able to really customize and really be particular about what you're doing, even if it's not to the level of like the soul of the new machine, or like what was happening with like the Selecta and like typewriters. But there is still this thing which is like, okay, things have kind of become soulless, and a way of injecting humanity and personality and whimsy into our computing is by obsessing over THOC and keycaps and switches and weight, and all that stuff. And I wonder if that's maybe part of it, is that we're all like seeking that bit of humanity that is felt like it's been lost a little bit, but which was a core part of why computing exploded to begin with. Because if you hadn't had that human aspect, just like sneakers, like I don't know if it would have taken off, right? Because there are so many technological things that don't have that kind of through line, but you could see it in the early computers. I mean, especially with Apple machines, but even with the IBM PC, like you could see the humanity. It's kind of it was like more than just an object,
So I just got to interject that, like, Marcin brought up looking under the hood of a car.
Yeah.
Which, well, like my dad in high school, like he bought parts from a junkyard and built his own first car. Like you can't do that now. Like we are separated. We have separated. Like a car used to be a thing. Anyone with the motivation could take their car apart and see how it works. And like we're separated from that now. And I do think it removes a certain amount of humanity from the machine.
I think you're right.
It's funny that you mentioned your dad. Like my dad's job when I was a kid was perfect for me because he was an arcade game and pinball repairman.
Nice.
So he would be sent to all of the arcades.
Wow.
And I still remember for people who remember pinballs, like or if you have a pinball nearby, which I think a lot of people do still, you just maybe have to find it. But there are all of these modern arcades. Ask them to open it up for you, and they can remove the glass and take the whole playfield and move it up, and you can see under the playfield at all of these solenoids and switches and stuff and light bulbs. And to me, seeing that was like a revelation, because it's sort of like view source for a pinball, but you can like stick your finger there. You actually probably don't want to stick your finger there. Stick a pen. The solenoids can actually hurt you. But speaking from experience, but you can sort of like see how it's made, and you can see like some logic choices that they made, or some cost-cutting choices, or some algorithm choices. And there's some debugging modes in software for all these pinballs from the 80s and onward. And it's just this wonderful thing where you realize like, oh, even play has to be designed. And even play has to be considered, and even play has to succumb to like boring logic. And how do you sort of creatively use that logic? And so, I think, Christina, you're also right that it's like, I think keyboards probably resonate along the same lines. Like you just solely, maybe you can open them, and you can like grab a keycap and remove it, and grab a switch and remove it, or open a switch. There's like multiple layers of discovery there. If you're interested, you can go even deeper and solder it. If you're interested on a different level, you can like change the software to do some things, right? You can be the next Dvorak. You probably also fail, but you will have your layout, and you can use it, and maybe convince a few people to use it as well, or do something completely random. Like one of the people that I interviewed for the book just made a keyboard with this unique layout made out of wood, because there were no keyboards made out of wood before. And that's kind of interesting. And you can start very simply as well, right? You can just grab one keycap or buy like one extra keyboard and see how it makes you feel, or I don't know, just like add one keyboard maestro, combination to keyboard maestro and feel just kind of like a little bit more excited about it.
Oh, are we going to talk about Keyboard Maestro?
We
No,
could.
we
I was going to say you spoke Brett's language because that's like yeah.
Speaking of bizarre keyboard layouts, though, someone in our Discord, and I've forgotten who, and I've forgotten what it's called, but there was a keyboard layout that started with THE. And the keyboard layout was based on like the most common letter combinations when writing in English. And it was like, I took a look at the keyboard. I knew that my brain was never going to grok like this entirely different. And I've tried Dvorak. Like,
yeah,
I grew up in the 80s. Like I typed on QWERTY keyboards, and it's all my brain I think is ever going to be able to take in as far as touch typing goes, without having to like look at the keyboard all the time. The idea of like smarter keyboard layouts, it's kind of fascinating. It's like you said, QWERTY been around for like 150 years, and even though it's not the smartest layout, everyone can agree it's not the most intelligent organization of the keys. It still has it is one time and again.
I see. I'm gonna like. I'm always fascinated by people kind of hating on QWERTY because, yes, they I would say there could be smarter layouts, but I also wonder, like, using Dvorak as an example, right? So August Dvorak came up with this thing in, I think, the 1930s, 1940s, which is funny because it seems like eons ago, but this was like 60, 70 years after the keyboard was invented, right? So time, history compresses events, but so QWERTY has been around for a while, and he didn't mince words, right? He called QWERTY the primitive torture board. He wrote the whole book was called Typewriting Behavior, saying basically the premise of the book was QWERTY sucks. What are you doing here, right? And he had this whole math and really an amazing set of considerations for how fingers travel on the keyboard and where the letters should be and how people make mistakes, and even just like the psychology of typing. There's this whole chapter about like laziness of all things. And so really strange and amazing book. And I would recommend reading it for people who are interested. And then he had this layout and kind of nothing happened, because I think Dvorak kind of forgot that, like, well, this quote unquote smartest layout, it only takes you so far. Like you still have to, on one hand, you have to market it, you have to build it, you have to convince people, you're working against motor memory of generations at this point. But then, like, I think what he also ignored is that, like, well, what if the premise is wrong, and what if QWERTY is actually good, or at least good enough? Like, what if the fact that it's been used for 60 years is like not an accident? Like, people like to believe that it's just
right.
This one time where market chose poorly, right? It's like we chose VHS against Betamax, right?
Sure.
And, which actually also has been debunked. VHS is supposedly actually really, really good. But the funny thing is that, like, even in the 70 years that he's seen keyboards change. Like, we progressively see fewer and fewer people professionally typing. The keyboards become, quote unquote, more and more ergonomic every 5 years. Even if you don't buy a quote unquote ergonomic keyboard, keyboards are just softer on our fingers and better. And QWERTY was okay. It was actually intentional from what we can tell. It wasn't like an accident. It wasn't there to slow people down. It was actually very thoughtful. And it's only gotten better because the way we use keyboards and the keyboards themselves have gotten better. So in a way, maybe for some people, yes, some people have problems with their shoulders, with their arms, with their wrists. There's a lot of people who would benefit from an improvement over like a $10 Dell QWERTY keyboard. But for a vast majority of people, I'm going to say it's probably good. You don't have to worry. And particularly, even touch typing. I think we've seen studies that say, like, touch typing may be kind of overrated too. Like, you don't have to touch type perfectly to be okay. And so that's kind of interesting. Like I've become a fan of QWERTY through writing this book, which
I love
didn't
that.
expect.
Was there an industry that cemented QWERTY as like the keyboard? Like in the VHS beta wars, it was really the porn industry that made VHS win. At the time that QWERTY kind of became popular, was there an industry that made it the forefront?
Yeah. So what's really interesting about QWERTY is that it was the first one. I mean, obviously, there were typewriters before the QWERTY typewriter, but most of them were not mass-produced. Most of them didn't really go very far. You couldn't actually use them well, or they didn't print well. And QWERTY just happened to be the first, or the first big commercial layout, and so it always faced competition from day one, and it always somehow managed to win. And I think the first use cases for QWERTY were QWERTY actually invented bureaucracy. QWERTY and elevators, right? They invented offices and bureaucracy. So that's kind of like a funny thing to think about. But also, I think it was like early typing for offices, but it was also transcribing Morse communication. And we know that like the person who invented the early typewriter, the QWERTY typewriter, he cared about that. So he was pretty smart about like knowing what the use cases are and knowing what's the minimum speed, which was maybe 30 to 40 words per minute, should be achievable. And like many good inventors, they mostly focus, or he and his team mostly focus on picking the right battles, right? So the first typewriter didn't have lowercase, because maybe not as important. That only came within the next decade. But the print looked good, and you could get a certain speed, and it wasn't jamming, right? So the whole QWERTY was designed not to slow people down. It was the opposite, to make it both fast to type and to make it easier for the machine to actually work, right? So this interesting concept of like human considerations, but also machine considerations.
Huh. Oh, so is it designed around the idea of like the hammers and a typewriter, like not coming from the same 2 points at the same time?
Yeah.
I didn't realize that.
Yeah. And it's funny because, and it was very specific to the way the first typewriters were made, which actually became obsolete 10 years. So within 10 years, QWERTY was solving a problem that didn't need solving anymore. Yeah, that's why it's really hard to even compare QWERTY and Dvorak, because they didn't exist in the same time span.
Sure,
right?
They were there to solve very different problems. Yeah,
that which is very interesting, and so, but yet QWERTY is endured, which I also think is interesting, right? Yeah. And I wonder if it's because sometimes I do wonder if it's because like Dvorak maybe was trying to solve the wrong problem. Like it's claiming that it's going to be easier, more efficient, and whatnot. But if that's maybe not maybe not really a problem. You know what I mean? Yeah. Like if that's okay, you can make more efficient layouts, but the QWERTY works well enough, even though the reason for its genesis doesn't exist anymore.
There's this wonderful book by Arika Okrent called "In a Land of Invented Languages" that talks about people who, created Esperanto or Loglan, is it called, or even Klingon. Klingon had more commercial roots, I suppose. And there's this interesting notion that it's actually like a surprisingly warm and sort of sad book, because it speaks about most of these people just wanted to fix the world. Like they said, I don't like the messiness of languages today. I would like them to work a certain way, or I would like them to reflect the universe a certain way. But it all came with this sort of naivete of like, oh, if I only solve this thing, people will understand it. And that's not like the languages being messy is actually the beauty of languages. And every language gets messy. Like even Esperanto has shortcuts right now and all of these things, because that's how people use languages. So I think Dvorak's, like there was a certain naivete. Like if I only prove you mathematically that my keyboard is better, you will use it. And there's also this other thing, of course, the dark side of QWERTY is that Remington, which was the first, big typewriter company, they also had a good legal team and a good sales team and a good promotion team and a lot of a lot of the success of QWERTY, and unfortunately we cannot decouple them, right? We cannot say like this was 40% engineering and 30% whatever, but they had a really good ideas of how to sell the typewriters, and that probably didn't hurt. And maybe if they sucked at it, maybe they would have, maybe another layout from 1870s or 1880s would have actually absorbed QWERTY. And they were also really good at sending their keyboards abroad, which explains why QWERTZ is so close to QWERTY, or AZERTY is so close to QWERTY, because it was all done by the same guy who actually didn't even speak any of those languages.
Sure.
But they just moved the keys enough, just again, so their keyboards wouldn't clash, in the same way they had to solve it for QWERTY, for English.
Christina, just FYI, your video has frozen for me, but in like a perfect pose. Like you look curious and intrigued. And like it's a nice like semi-profile. You look great.
You should take a screenshot of that, because I'm going to turn it off and turn it on again and see if that fixes it. But take a screenshot first, because I want to see how ridiculous I look.
Done. You don't look ridiculous. You look fan-fucking-tastic.
Yeah, I don't believe you. Am I back to you now?
No. It went off, and you came back looking exactly as good.
Oh wow.
That is bizarre.
For the record, I see Christina moving. So
okay. It's just me. It's just me.
You.
So speaking of arcade games, there, Christina, I can see you moving now. You guys both have the Playdate, which has come up on our show before. I am outside of this. I observed the release of the Playdate and have not heard much about it since. So I'm curious to hear you guys talk a little bit about your Playdates.
Yeah. Marcin, would you like to start?
Where do I start? I think, I'm a big fan of Panic, and have been just, even outside of like specific things that they do, just the way they do things.
Yeah.
Sort of like creators before creations.
Same.
But what's really interesting for me, and I think that actually came up with the book as well, and a lot of other sort of, I've always been into computing history. And there's this idea of like, how do you approach nostalgia? Because there are good ways and bad ways, right? Like nostalgia is supposed to kind of help you, and it's there to soften our lives in general. But, you can sort of weaponize it, as we've seen in some presidential elections. And you can also sort of succumb to nostalgia and be like, well, the only arcade games were in the 80s and nothing after that matters. And if you like them, you're stupid, or something like this. And I think what I really like about Playdate, sort of conceptually, is how they try to negotiate with nostalgia. Because it's not just like, we're just going to rewind the clock 25 years and build this device. It's actually, well, we're just going to look at the past and see maybe some of the simplicity that used to be coming from the limited technology, and then, as the technology progressed, it went away. Maybe that simplicity was still worth it outside of, maybe they were just coupled together. And maybe there's something nice about like a simple control scheme or a black and white thing. There's something that could help with creativity. There may be something that could help people relate to the sort of beauty and quirkiness, or maybe something that would attract strange creators, which I think Playdate did really well, which is just like a lot of those games. Sometimes it's hard even to call them games. They're just strange and quirky and weird. And they would just be like, how do we build a device that sort of optimizes for weirdness? And I think, I think I'm in awe of the process of Playdate coming together, maybe more so than the Playdate itself, which is a beautiful object falling in my head right now. But it's just like the way they talked about what it means to them, and some of the design decisions and some of the choices they made. It's just a vision of a device that doesn't belong in any particular era. It just sort of picks from different moments in time. And I think that's something wonderful that as computers get older, we should all be doing very carefully, of sort of picking like I have a keyboard with modern keyboard, but the keycaps are from the 70s, because I think that's my responsibility to do stuff like that.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with you. I like you, I love Panic, and I've been a fan of their aesthetic for such a long time. Like I still have. They sold, God, this was so many years ago, but they sold like Atari style game boxes for their software products that you could just like buy. And so it was like Transmit and Candy Bar, and I think they had one like Audio. Yeah, and I have them somewhere, and they were just so fun. And I was not alive during any of the Atari's run. Like I'm a Nintendo generation kid, but I loved the aesthetic anyway. And so I've always loved their whimsy. You know, when they had their what was the app that they had in the App Store? Kind of based on their dashboard that the iOS really unfortunately wasn't prepared to do
Wasn't it called Dashboard?
Something like that. But that was based on, you know, the custom dashboard that they'd created at their office that would show, you know,
I remember
what commute times were and what people's progress was in certain things. It was great. I love all their experiments. I love their design philosophy.
Status board.
There you go. Status board.
Yes.
I love their whimsy. I love their design decisions. I love their blogs. I love, you know, Cable's like obsession with, you know, like weird snack foods. You know, I'm a fan of Panic, and I've met, you know, the team a number of times, and over the years, like you know, been to their offices. Like I feel like I can call them internet friends of mine. I think the first time I ever met Cable and Steven, like it was like meeting superstars to me. Like I think I was more excited by that than like actual celebrities that I've met and interviewed, if I'm being totally honest. So like you, like the process of the device is almost as it definitely mattered way more. Like I haven't played my Playdate much since I got it. I got all the games and I've used it, and I have played with the SDK, which is really cool. But when I first used a Playdate at XOXO 2019, I guess it was, I think it was the last XO, there's a photo that someone took of me using it, and I you know, tweeted, I was like, this is what pure joy looks like, and you just see this huge smile on my face as I'm interacting with the crank. And I love Teenage Engineering, who obviously had a huge, you know, a amount to do with it. And so, I think that just kind of going back to a thread we've had here, sort of the humanity and the personality and the thoughtfulness that went into the whole thing. And also, I really appreciated, and I still appreciate, that it is not a device for everyone, and they're not trying to make it for everyone. I love that. Like, I love that, because there were so many people who were telling me online, and because I would talk about a podcast or say in person, like, why would you ever buy that? This is so dumb. It's going to be sitting in a drawer somewhere. I was like, yeah, probably. But this is the perfect device for someone like us, you know, which are like older millennials or Gen Xers who have disposable income and have like a love of like weird nostalgia kind of driven devices. But also, frankly, the crank is a really, really good interface.
Very nice.
It's a really, really good interface for controlling the games. Like, it's actually really interesting. And I think about that a lot. Like, you're a designer. I'm not a designer, but I'm a design appreciator. Brett is a designer, but I'm somebody who loves, like, I wish I could. I wish I had the artistic abilities, because I love design and art so much. And I think about like the thought process that goes into that, and like thinking about, okay, how can we make this crank more than just a gimmick, and actually now how are you going to build a game that is going to use that as you know, a UX mechanism, but also as like a mechanical, you know, control of getting through, you know, the game. Like, I think that's so fascinating.
I mean it's I'm glad you used the word joyful. Like it definitely like awakened a lot of like joy in me, and but also just sort of this it reminded me of like, oh, like there's a lot of places that still deserve creativity. Like, we're not done with any of these things, right? Like, like this is a unique thing in a space that's filled with things like this already, right? And it posits that like maybe in every space that's already filled with things, there's still room for other things that are unique. And I also like that. Yeah, the crank is like, I've always believed like there's nothing wrong with a good gimmick. You just have to like, you know, like you just have to run with it and use it well. And I think people love gimmicks. It's like there's nothing wrong with like using the word gimmick, because they actually like elevated it, right? And it's funny. Oh my God, when you started talking about Panic, I was just immediately like remember the thing where they had this app where you can control their sign on their building?
Yes.
The color of the sign, or Buggy Saints Row, the musical, that from it must have been 20 years ago or 50 years ago, like Cable just like made this musical about the bug, the game Saints Row.
Yes.
And so I just, in part of like loving Playdate is just like, I just want to support creators that do things like this and that bring this joy to other people and who remind us that like, yeah, we can like, there's so much more room for creativity everywhere. And even in, as you said, like places where some people might scoff and say like, well, this is not going to be the next DS, or the next Switch or whatever.
It's like, it doesn't want to be, like they weren't trying to do that. They were wanting to build something cool for them. I think they were a little bit taken aback. I mean, they've written as much, but I think even talking to them when I was playing with the prototype and talking to some of the team members who worked on it, like, I think that they were taken aback by the initial interest. And obviously, like how many people wanted to order and how they had to, which created a bunch of logistical problems, which 2020 didn't help with. But even without that,
I remember that, yeah.
But even without that, I think that they would have suffered a little bit, just because like this was supposed to be kind of like a small batch thing that did have wider appeal.
Yeah.
But that's an interesting thing too. I think kind of relates to keyboards a little bit, which is you have this thing that is maybe specified at a niche, right? And then it becomes more broadly adopted, and then the expectations change.
Yeah.
And but what you were doing, like your initial intent, doesn't.
Yeah, I mean it's both keyboards, or even we were talking earlier about my Kickstarter, and once I imagine it's pretty universal, but like I imagine like once your Kickstarter gets like to a certain level, you start seeing all of this spam. Hey, we can give you like 10,000 more people, probably not 10,000, but like, 1,000 more people or 500 more people looking at this. And I'm like, I don't know if I want to, like
right.
at some point, I don't want to lose this sort of strangeness of this thing I'm creating, or this, this, I don't want to soften the quirkiness necessarily. Right. Or I don't want mass appeal, because I think that's covered. Like, there are industries that do that really well. I want to rather find somebody, like I want to find everybody who would love this thing that I created, rather than more people who might like never care for it,
Yeah. I was kind of curious about that, like to talk maybe a little bit more about it. I know we're getting close on time, but I just wanted to kind of know more about like your experience with the Kickstarter, because I have to imagine it's similar with the Playdate. Like, you were hoping it would be successful. Now is it still the third most backed book, or is it the second most at this point?
It's close to being like the second most funded non-fiction book in Kickstarter's history. Which, as I say those words, I don't even know what they mean to me.
Right. No, but that has to feel incredible. But that also has to feel like, again, I wonder, like, you've put all this time into this, you built it with a certain thing. At the beginning, you were even talking about how like you get people who were, kind of trying to mansplain keyboards to you, which is what's going to happen when something gets out of the bubble that you created in and goes more broad. But I wonder, like, I guess just like how you're kind of like dealing with that, because I appreciate that you're still trying to keep it what it is. I've covered over the years, especially when I was a journalist, so many failed Kickstarter campaigns where people couldn't fulfill what happened because it blew up and it was way more successful than they expected. And then they add on these goals and they're like, oh, well, now we're going to do this and this and this and this. Yeah. And it takes away from, because people in the process get excited about what the possibility of this thing could be rather than what the inventor's intent was. And I wondered, I guess, about like how do you balance that? Like, staying, I guess, kind of true to what your book is, because at this point, in addition to having spammers coming at you and like, we can get you this much more, I would also imagine, like, have you had more traditional publishers come at you? Because I would think that you would, right? Like, I would think that they would be like, hey, maybe it won't be printed the same way that you're doing it, but this clearly has an audience. Do you want, partner? And I'm just curious, like, how you balance keeping what it is while at the same time you've got this runaway success.
Yeah, so I think what was important for me and what I spend a lot of time is thinking about, like, what do I want this book to be? To a point that I actually have it written down. Like, many years ago, I was like, here are my goals for the book. And at no point, there was a certain number of people that I wanted to have this book, which the campaign now succeeded. And that was the numeric goal. And of course, I didn't want to lose money on the book because that opens the whole universe of travel. But other than that, I just had I want to be proud of how the book feels. I want to do justice to the people who I'm interviewing. I want not to lose the quirkiness. And so there were a bunch of those kind of things that I kept looking at over and over again and talking to people. And even the whole process of, I originally wanted this book to be traditionally published because that's kind of how I grew up. And what felt like, quote unquote, the right way to do it. And it took me a year via conversations with many, many people to realize I actually don't want to self-publish. I want to self-publish this, and it's not going to be me being a loser if I do that. Self-publishing is a much more interesting space right now. And so I think I just had a lot of time to think about what I want this and the sort of quote unquote success criteria and whatnot. And that was really helpful in hopefully not losing that right now, not sort of chasing the ball of what if I was the number one Kickstarter book of all time, which that's actually not possible. It's incredible. The number is just wild, but it's $46 million, right? It's just
oh my God.
It's really
it's not going to happen, right? Totally.
Yeah. But the sort of exactly chasing this sort of a certain deal with a publisher that says what if this is an airport bookstore kind of a book. I was like, no, it's not. Maybe there is. Maybe I won't get tired with keyboards, and I will actually write another one. That's a very different audience and a very different process, which could be interesting. So I think for me was just trying to think and be honest with myself and write down the goals for this project for me, and then not lose track of. And I'm lucky enough to be surrounded by people who are helping me with this project, like my editor, who also get it, who also understand what I'm after, and who are helping me sort of, navigate those spaces. And I think, and giving me candid feedback sometimes, hey, you may be getting distracted here, or vice versa, saying for the next marketing thing, just do kind of what you want to do, do something that you enjoy rather than, something that you have to do. So navigating that, that's been really important to me.
All right.
I think that's great.
Should we do a rapid fire gratitude before we close out?
Yeah, I would love that.
Do you have one ready, Christina, or do you want to wait while we go? Okay. Yeah. Christina, you get to kick it off, just like the mental health corner.
Okay, so my pick is an app called Sloth, and this is one that it's been around for a while, but I just discovered it on Hacker News yesterday, and it is basically a Mac app that shows you a GUI to show you all the open ports and data things that are happening on your system. So it's really interesting, and this is something that I don't think that I would probably use very often, but I'm playing with it, and it's interesting just to see, I guess, if you're trying to figure out, because it shows you all the open files, directories, sockets, the pipes that are in use, and then the running processes. So it's basically just a GUI for isoff, or maybe it's lsoff. I don't know. I don't know the Unix command because I've never used this command. lsoff, yeah, I've never used this command, and so but it's in a usable way. And I saw this on Hacker News yesterday that a new version was released. It's available for both Apple Silicon and Intel, and I was like, oh, this is actually a really interesting way to look at all the different things that are happening on my Mac at one time. And I could see this as actually being really useful for figuring out if something is broken or what it's doing. And also, maybe what apps are spying on you. Although little snitch would be way better than that. But I don't know. It doesn't have the best design or anything. It's a pure utility app, but I saw this and I've only played with it a little bit and I really like it. And I'm not mad at it. It also goes all the way back to macOS 10.8. So
I did see this come up on Hacker News. It's from I don't know how to say, Sveinbjorn, Bjorn Svein, the same guy who made Platypus, the Mac app that can turn a shell script into an application bundle. Simple idea, very handy tool.
Which I've used before.
I've used Platypus for 20 years, 15 years. That's old school. So I went to his software page. He has a whole bunch of apps I've never used, but Sloth is the second one on his software page. So yeah, that looks cool. He describes it as basically a friendly exploratory GUI for LSOF, which all the developers will know what that means, and everyone else will be like, "What?"
Well, I'm a developer and I've never used it, but I'm not like a hardcore or anything. But I don't think I've ever used that.
I have used LSOF when I've had questions about. I don't even remember what the last time it came up was. I've never voluntarily used LSOF, but I have been instructed to, in the process of solving other problems, run LSOF to determine what port something was using or what was accessing a port or a file or a socket. And it's not a regular part of my repertoire. I could definitely use a GUI. So that's awesome. Do you want to go next, Marcin?
Sure. My choice is Ivory. I like many people. I think I found Mastodon to be a great alternative to the artist formerly known as Twitter, and Ivory is, I think, the first app for Mastodon that I actually really enjoy using. I struggle with some of the other ones. I'm a designer. Maybe I just need something that's a little bit more polished, that's a little bit more aesthetically pleasing, or and Ivory is the first app that I was just like, oh, this is this is like a great alternative to all the other ones. But also I really like, because it's sort of similar to what we talked about with Playdate, which is it's kind of quirky, it's a little weird, it has personality. It's made some choices that I, as a designer, wouldn't maybe make, and maybe some I actually disagree with, but also they're like really interesting choices, and it's really fun. It again sort of made me feel like, oh, we're not done with those things. There's some creative choices we could make here, or some weird stuff, not just like in a space of like a social media, consumption app, but just apps in general. Like for example, I forgot how long it's been since the app allowed me to choose like an accent color, which I immediately, orange, it's gonna be orange. Oh, I can change the icon to be orange too. It's so simple, but I think iOS and macOS sort of locked a lot of this down because design, and I'm speaking as a designer. I do that too, but just the little moments of customization just made me so excited to it's like it's the only, let me see. Yeah, it's the only yellow icon I have on my home screen, which is like a funny thing to say, but my home screen is very, very grateful for that. So I don't know, Ivory. And it's done by Tapbots, right?
Yeah, same people who made one of our favorite apps, Tweetbot. And we talked about it on a recent show. They have a rest in peace page for Tweetbot with an elephant looking at it, which is a reference to Ivory, which is now out for it's in beta. I have it through test flight. I'm loading it up right now just to see what's up. But I'm a huge fan of Tweetbot. I have a lot of faith that I'm gonna love Ivory.
Yeah.
The funny thing, I've never used Tweetbot, so
that's so funny.
Been missing out. Maybe I've been missing out for like 15 years, but maybe better late than never.
Totally. Yeah, no, I've been using it since I missed out on the beta for iOS, but Paul was nice enough to invite me into the Mac beta early, and then they just recently changed that test flight. They separated the two, and so I'm back in that one as well, and it's really good. It's really, really good. It's for me, and I've talked about this I think before, like what's totally changed my Mastodon experience has been getting good apps. And Ivory is definitely one of them. One of the fun things is also for the iOS app, and this I think is really, really cute, is that you can customize the icon. And one of the icons is basically the RIP tweetbot icon. So if you wanted the app icon to look, like still have kind of the tweet bot with the halo on it, like that's one of their options, which I think is really cute.
Nice.
But it's, to me, I don't know, it's just amazing how much of a difference good tools make for this platform. I still have some issues with Mastodon, but it for me, like, it's just a completely different experience. Having things like elk.zone and ice cubes and Ivory being, I think, the most polished, just like has fundamentally changed my experience with the service. Whereas the apps that existed before that and the main website, like, I'm not trying to criticize people who are putting labor of love into things, but just it's not there, it's not the sort of thing that I can come back to, especially for people like us who really respect the thoughtful design of things. Yeah,
it reminds me a little bit, and this is at the risk of maybe angering a lot of people, but there was this recent debate, I think Gruber wrote about Android and iOS, sort of the quality of design. And there's something about it that I think the conversation, and there were more people adding to that conversation, I think they captured something. Just like, there's intangible things that matter. And it's hard sometimes to understand for people who don't understand design or never maybe talk to a designer. But those add up. And like, this is exactly right, Christina. For me, I've already like crossed the threshold, which is just like, oh, this is enjoyable. This wasn't optional. There needs to be a certain level of care and attention, polish and quality to apps. And maybe we all calibrate it differently. But for me, I've already crossed the threshold and I started just feeling like, oh, the Mastodon experience is really fun. I thought it couldn't be, but it was really the app and nothing else.
I have finally hit like a critical mass with my Mastodon follower versus following, and am getting an amount of feedback to a toot that makes it feel interactive instead of just shouting into a void. And it feels like there's a community there, and my following on Mastodon is way smaller than my one on Twitter. But they are as interactive, and I have enjoyed it. Exactly. I use Toot on iOS. It's just Toot with an exclamation point. It's been pretty good. I would love to get on the Ivory iOS beta, but I did not catch that one.
DM Paul and see, because I'm sure that they have people who go in and off of the things. It's also available to buy now, so you can just
buy
it.
I'll buy it. I'll just
it's in the App Store. It's in the App Store. The Mac version is not in the App Store yet. It's in alpha.
Yeah, no, I got the Mac version. I'm running.
That's fine. You can just buy it. Okay, I thought I was following you on Mastodon. I don't know if I am. What is your Mastodon username?
Oh man, my Mastodon username is ttscoff, as usual, at nojack.easydns.ca.
Okay, then I am following you there. Okay.
Yeah. I kind of want to switch to a more notable instance, like, Mastodon.social or one of the various. But I jumped on Mastodon early, and EasyDNS, the fucking libertarians that run it, had a pretty good privacy policy and overall community policy that I agreed with, and so I jumped on that one and just kind of stuck with it. Libertarians. Anyway, so you guys both went. You guys both went GUI with your picks. I'm going terminal. I found this new thing called McFly.
Okay.
And it is
I love the name already.
Replacement. So like in your terminal, you hit Control R and you can reverse search your command history, right? I have for a long time used FZF, and I've set it up so I hit Control R and it pipes my entire history file through FZF, and I can fuzzy search for a previous command. McFly basically offers a similar fuzzy search, not as fuzzy. You still, like, if you don't include a space, it won't recognize the search. But it does add directory awareness. So it will prioritize commands that you have run in the current directory when you do the command history search, which is even if you just hit Control R and just use your arrow key to get to a command you've run in that directory, but probably not in the current session, it works great. It works with Fish, it works with Z Shell, it works with Bash. It is an excellent little Control R history replacement.
I love this. And I went to add it to my stars and it was already there. So I've clearly seen this before. Marcin, for some background, my GitHub stars is the greatest. Like I always tell people, don't follow me for my code because my code is worthless. My stars are freaking great. Mm-hmm. I find the best stuff. So I search through my stars all the time, but I find little gems and then I forget about it. But I had McFly there. And so clearly I looked at it at one point. I might have used it once, but I don't have it installed. I'm installing it now. But I love this.
For anyone who doesn't already know, if you go to overtiredpod.com, I wrote a WordPress plugin just to display Christina's starred repositories on the website. So you scroll down to the bottom and in the footer of any page, you can find Christina's starred repositories, which is, as she said, a fantastic collection of the latest and greatest in open source code.
Yeah, I also have. Oh, sorry, go on.
Is McFly a reference to Back to the Future?
Back to the Future, I have to assume, yes.
I have to assume so, which is brilliant.
History search, Back to the Future, yeah, it makes sense.
Right. The only thing I was going to say is that in my stars collection, so in addition to having all the stars, we also have a feature called lists that you can create in GitHub. And I have one called Mastodon Goodness, which I've been keeping relatively up to date, which is like front-end clients, guides, tools, and other stuff related to Mastodon.
Nice.
And then I have one called Playdate stuff, which is cool things for the Playdate. So that is, both of those are available as well as the other things that I find. So just wanted to point that out there. I'm trying to curate my massive list of stars into better organized lists for certain purposes. And I happen to do that. I didn't know you could
have lists. That's awesome.
I know we don't talk about it enough because I think that I'm probably one of the biggest power users of stars working at GitHub, and I don't even work on the stars project.
I also just started using GitHub Copilot. Finally got around to testing it out, and it turns out because of my open source contributions, like I have free access to it. So I gotta get more used to that. They have a feature called Brush Copilot. Like you can like give it a function and tell it to just fix any bugs in it, and it just figures out what bug is. Interesting. All right. Well, Marcin, thank you so much for joining us today. It was a pleasure.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, it's so great. I'm so glad you could come on, and you're like, I think this book is perfect for our audience of people who are into this sort of thing. I pre-ordered it, the book immediately.
Thank you.
What was so funny was that you and we met in a completely unrelated way. And I saw some tweets about the book when it was kind of coming out. And I was like, wait a minute, I know him. Like, it was so funny because last year, Marcin and I spent like more than an hour talking about sneakers and just in DMs, and we just had a fantastic conversation. It was like one of like the highlights of like my afternoon, like just it's like a random Sunday afternoon last year, and it was so lovely. It was like one of those like classic like good internet experiences where you just connect with a stranger over something. And then I saw the book and I was like, oh my God, and Glenn edited it. And it looks like this is completely like my shit. I was like, I'm so excited. I immediately told Brett and Jeff, and I'm so sad Jeff couldn't be here. I was like, no, we have to have him on because this is completely like in the pocket of everything that our audience cares about.
Yep. All right. So everyone check out shifthappens.site. You can even see 3D renderings of the book and get an idea what you are kickstarting, and it looks amazing. I also am I'm on for a pre-order. Very much looking forward to it. And in the meantime, get some sleep.
Get some sleep.
The system is going down now.
Hey there, good people. Before you go, we have a bunch of new places where you can interact with us. Please check out our Instagram feed, our YouTube channel, Twitter, of course, and sign up for the Overtired newsletter, which will sort of pick up where the show leaves off, with expanded show notes, a little bit of what the three of us get up to between episodes, and let's face it, there'll be some musings. How can you resist musings? You'll find details for all the ways to interact with us in the show notes and at overtired.com. And thank you, as always, for listening.